He's offered everything. You're right. You know why? Because he doesn't want to around with the United States.
Nicolás Maduro has managed to stay in power in Venezuela thanks to a dirty game of political manipulation, repression, and corruption. However, his regime has dragged the country into an unprecedented economic catastrophe. Since assuming leadership in 2013, after Hugo Chávez's death, Venezuela has experienced a downward spiral marked by hyperinflation, the total collapse of basic services, and a brutal decline in oil production, the engine of its economy. Maduro, far from having the capacity to handle the crisis, has used the power of the state to enrich himself and keep his inner circle afloat, while the people suffer the consequences. Meanwhile, the United States, led by Donald Trump, has made it clear that it will not allow Venezuela to remain a refuge for drug trafficking, organized crime, and authoritarianism. Since 2017, the U.S. administration has intensified its actions to weaken Maduro, not only with economic sanctions, but also with covert CIA operations, pressuring his regime on all fronts. Trump's government, backed by a military and political sector that sees Maduro as a regional threat, has not hesitated to label the regime a narco state and has kept the possibility of military intervention open. Are we witnessing the prelude to a secret U.S. invasion of Venezuela? The pieces are on the board: sanctions, diplomatic pressure, covert military operations. While Maduro clings to power with the help of allies like Russia, Iran, and Cuba, the U.S. government does not seem willing to let him remain in place. The question is not if intervention will happen, but when. How Maduro came to power. Nicolás Maduro did not come to power on his own merits, but through a Machiavellian political move and a power vacuum after Hugo Chávez's death. When Commander Chávez passed away in 2013, Venezuela was immersed in an economic and political crisis that Chávez had left intact, despite his revolutionary discourse. Maduro, who had been Chávez's foreign minister and vice president, used his proximity to power to launch his presidential campaign in an election that was, from the outset, a disguised fraud. With a weakened opposition and a state propaganda apparatus in his favor, Maduro was proclaimed president, but his rise was immediate and questioned. Allegations of fraud and protests on the streets were brutally suppressed, and the Venezuelan people, disillusioned by Chávez's figure, were forced to accept a man who lacked his predecessor's vision and leadership. However, the real engine that propelled his rise was not popular trust, but the absolute control he had over the armed forces, armed collectives, and the state apparatus that allowed him to consolidate absolute power at the cost of the nation's suffering. Over the years, Maduro has ruled with an iron fist, relying on a systemic corruption system where the military, politicians, and businesses close to his regime enrich themselves while the people sink deeper into poverty. Every move has been a masterstroke to cling to power, from manipulating elections to silencing the opposition with repression and persecution. But behind his facade of governance, the truth is that Maduro has turned Venezuela into a narco state, and his stay in power is a sign of the decay of the system that sustains him. Systemic corruption, the reason for Venezuela's fall. Corruption in Venezuela is not just an isolated problem or a malfunction of the system, but the very core upon which Maduro's regime has been built. Since the days of Hugo Chávez, the state apparatus was gradually hijacked by a network of dark interests, including military officers, politicians, businessmen, and criminal mafias that turned national resources into personal loot. As the economic crisis deepened, it became clear that the regime was not interested in saving the country, but in securing its own enrichment. Under Maduro's government, large oil, mining, and gold export contracts were handed to shell companies, many of which were directly linked to the presidential family and their closest allies. while millions of Venezuelans starved or emigrated in search of a better life. The regime's military and bureaucrats benefited from a system of bribes, extortion, and money laundering. The Cartel of the Suns, a network of corrupt officials operating at all levels of the armed forces, seized drug trafficking and gold smuggling, protecting Colombian drug traffickers and distributing cocaine shipments with total impunity. The theft of natural resources like gold and oil, as well as the diversion of public funds to private accounts, has become a survival strategy for the regime. Maduro not only protected these groups, but incorporated them into his power structure. The consequence has been catastrophic for the Venezuelan people. A collapsed economy, a destroyed currency, and a country turned into a failed state, while the elites who sustain it enjoy a life of luxury, with bank accounts abroad and mansions in the Caribbean. Corruption is not a government error. It is the foundation of Maduro's power. Trump's strategy, the fall of Maduro, a geopolitical game. Since Donald Trump assumed the US presidency in 2017, Venezuela became a central target of his foreign policy. The Trump administration not only criticized Maduro for the humanitarian crisis affecting the country, but it also began implementing a strategy of maximum pressure that included economic sanctions, financial blockades, and in some cases, covert actions. The intent was not just to weaken the regime, but the ultimate goal of the Trump administration was to force Maduro's fall, promoting a political transition that would end what they called a narco state. Trump's government made it clear from the start that Venezuelan democracy had to be restored at any cost. Trump, backed by governments in the region like Brazil, Colombia, and other Latin American allies, pressured Maduro to step down. The sanctions policy was devastating. Blockades to Venezuela's oil industry, freezing government assets abroad, and direct sanctions on key regime officials. Diplomatic pressure increased when Trump recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate president, further delegitimizing Maduro's government. But Trump's strategy went beyond sanctions. In 2020, the US government declassified documents suggesting covert military operations within Venezuela. Although a direct invasion never materialized, the presence of mercenaries, intelligence reports, and growing cooperation with the opposition indicated that the US was willing to use any means necessary to weaken Maduro. Furthermore, the threat of military intervention was never ruled out, becoming a constant pressure factor on the Venezuelan regime. Trump's policy was also marked by his confrontation with Maduro's allies, Russia, China, and Cuba. With their support, Maduro managed to stay in power, but the growing pressure from the United States was a sword of Damocles hanging over his head. The situation in Venezuela became a geopolitical battleground where Trump's strategy aimed not only to overthrow Maduro, but also to align the region against 21st century socialism. For Trump, Venezuela was not just an internal conflict, but a regional challenge that had to be resolved by any means necessary, despite constant threats of intervention and the international siege imposed by the United States and its allies. Nicolás Maduro has managed to stay in power thanks to a network of international allies that support him both politically and militarily. These relationships have been crucial to the survival of his regime, as they have provided him with not only diplomatic support, but also financial assistance and military protection. First, Russia has been one of Maduro's closest allies. Under the presidency of Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin has seen Venezuela as a strategic partner in Latin America. Military cooperation has been a key component of this relationship, with Russia sending military advisors, defense equipment, and advanced technology to strengthen Venezuela's armed forces. Additionally, Russia has provided diplomatic support at the United Nations, vetoing resolutions that would sanction Maduro's regime and defending its sovereignty against foreign interventions. On the other hand, the commercial relationship between the two countries has grown, with energy and petrochemical agreements that have allowed Venezuela to maintain an economic escape route despite U.S. sanctions. China has also been a fundamental ally, not only providing financial investments through credits and loans, but also ensuring the export of natural resources like Venezuelan oil to its own market. In this sense, China has played a crucial role in the economic survival of Maduro's regime, offering a source of income amid the growing internal crisis. Additionally, the diplomatic relationship has been solid, with Beijing taking a defensive stance against international criticism of Maduro's regime. Cuba, with its historical influence in Venezuela since Chávez's time, remains one of the most important pillars of support for Maduro. Cooperation in intelligence and security has been essential to maintaining control over internal security forces and popular protests. Cuba has also provided technical advice in key areas like health and education in an attempt to mitigate the effects of the country's humanitarian crisis. Furthermore, the ideological solidarity between the two regimes, based on revolutionary socialism, has maintained an alliance that, although tense, has been crucial for the survival of Maduro's government. The support of these countries has allowed Maduro's regime to stay afloat despite international isolation and sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies. However, this support has not come without a price. In exchange for their alliances, Venezuela has had to cede strategic resources, like oil and minerals, in return for political and economic assistance. This external dependence has increased the regime's fragility. As if any of these powers withdraw their support, the collapse of Maduro's government could be imminent. This relationship with allies has not only allowed resistance to external pressures, but also turned Venezuela into a geopolitical battlefield. Once a powerful oil nation, the country has now become a key piece in the rivalry between great powers, where the struggle for influence in Latin America has translated into the strengthening of authoritarianism in the region. While the international community watches, Maduro continues to receive support from those who see his regime as an ally in the fight against imperialism and an alternative to the neoliberal policies promoted by the United States. The role of corruption in the regime's survival corruption in Venezuela is not an isolated phenomenon or a fortuitous consequence. It is the pillar upon which Nicolás Maduro has built his authoritarian regime. Since his rise to power in 2013, Maduro has made corruption a survival strategy, not only to stay in power, but also to consolidate a network of internal loyalties that have supported him in a country plunged into crisis. The armed forces, politicians from his inner circle, and allied businessmen have benefited from the country's wealth, which includes oil, gold, and drug trafficking routes, while the population suffers hyperinflation and shortages of basic goods. The Cartel of the Suns, made up of high-ranking Venezuelan military officers, has been the clearest example of how state corruption intertwines with drug trafficking. The military officers who control major cocaine trafficking routes from Colombia, the Orinoco mining arm, and other illicit economies receive millions in payments for their complicity with international drug cartels, while Maduro's regime directly profits from illegal trade. This system has created a parallel state where corruption is so systemic that the state apparatus and criminal networks operate as one unit. But this corrupt structure has not gone unpunished. During Donald Trump's presidency, the United States intensified its strategy of maximum pressure on the Maduro regime, accusing it of heading what it calls a narco state. The Trump administration authorized CIA covert operations in Venezuela, while the Pentagon deployed naval forces in the Caribbean to intercept cocaine shipments supposedly linked to the regime. Trump also declared that he was willing to authorize ground attacks against the cartels in Venezuela, given that the drug trafficking networks operate with state complicity. This military strategy, alongside economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure, has been part of an integrated plan to dismantle the criminal networks that have kept Maduro in power. In parallel, the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize awarded to Maria Corina Machado represents a symbolic and strategic blow to the regime. The award, internationally recognized, not only legitimizes the Venezuelan opposition, but also strengthens international pressure against Maduro by presenting Machado as a symbol of democratic resistance against a regime that has been driven by drug trafficking and corruption. This prize acts as a diplomatic tool that strengthens the position of the United States and its allies, while increasing the visibility of Venezuela's crisis on the global agenda. Machado's Nobel becomes a key asset in the international narrative, linking the fight for democracy with the denunciation of the narco state and Maduro's systemic corruption. This legitimization of the opposition, combined with Trump's military and intelligence actions, tightens the noose around the regime. While Washington accuses Maduro of running a narco state, the international community recognizes the regime's top opponent as a global figure for peace and democracy. Thus, the fight against Maduro is not just a power struggle, but a battle for legitimacy and justice in Venezuela. Corruption, crime, and Venezuela's future Maduro has turned Venezuela into a nest of corruption and criminality that is suffocating the country. He has not only undermined democratic institutions with his absolute control, but has used the state apparatus as a tool for personal enrichment and to keep his inner circle in power. Drug trafficking, illegal mining, and shady businesses have been the foundations on which he has stood, fueling a parallel economy that only benefits the regime's allies. While the Venezuelan people die of hunger and despair, Maduro's structural corruption is not an isolated problem or a management error. It is the very reason for his stay in power. The regime has created a network of complicity involving the military, politicians, and businessmen willing to betray their country in exchange for power and money. Meanwhile, the international community watches in horror as a narco state grows that threatens the stability of the entire region. The United States, led by Trump, has intensified its pressure on the regime, taking the fight against drug trafficking and corruption to unprecedented military and diplomatic levels. With covert operations, severe sanctions, and recognition of the opposition as a legitimate force, the international community has closed ranks around the fight for democracy and justice in Venezuela. However, the question remains the same. What will be left of Venezuela when Maduro's regime finally falls? Will it be the end of a criminal dictatorship, or simply the beginning of another cycle of looting and corruption? As long as the system of impunity and complicity remains, the nation will continue trapped in a spiral of violence and destruction. Only when the system of impunity and complicity is dismantled will Venezuela have a real opportunity to rise and rebuild what was once one of the most prosperous nations in Latin America.